It's good to have you here. Thank you for being here tonight. Let's have a word of prayer and then we'll get started with our class. Father, thank you for everything you do for us. Thank you for this evening, the time set aside to gather, see each other, to talk with each other, encourage each other, and at this moment to mutually study your word, to learn from your people of old within the Hebrew Scriptures as we go through our study in the book of Exodus. We're thankful to you for all your blessings, all the opportunities that came our way. We are thankful for Christ and all the blessings that we have in Him, being forgiven of sin, being adopted into your family, having all the promises to find their yes, their amen in Him. We're thankful that you work all things for good, no matter what those things may be. And we pray that each time that we open your word, each experience that we go through, that our faith grows just a little bit more with each passing moment. Be with us through the rest of this evening. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. We are in Exodus chapter 15 tonight. Exodus 15, we're going to be at the end of the chapter. So we're going to look at verses 22 through 27. Exodus chapter 15, verses 22 through 27. I'll give you a chance to turn there. So Israel has crossed over the Red Sea. Moses led them over on dry ground. Egypt, with Pharaoh and the military, the majority of them been washed away. And so now they are on the other side. Moses leads them in a song. Miriam will do the same thing as a song. She's referred to as a prophetess. She's the sister of Aaron, and she's going to be a prominent figure as we continue to go along. So we really get a shift within the story, within the narrative. So from here on out, from starting in chapter 15, verse 22, all the way to 18, verse 27, there are going to be 4 accounts that fill the journey to Sinai. It's where Israel's going. She's on her way. There are going to be 4 accounts, four major moments in her history post-Red Sea that are really going to define her and give us a lot of practical things to which we can learn from. But the biggest theme of all 4 is Israel's lack of faith. Each time she is going to meet a challenge, and each time she is going to respond with complaints, with grumbling, with murmuring, with arguing. You'll see all of those words come along. And when we finally get into Deuteronomy, Moses will look back and call this rebellion. And then when you get into the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer will call this lack of faith or a lack of trust. Now, say all of that to say this isn't going to be just something where we just pile dirt on Israel. We do the same thing. We do the same thing. We are no better. We may say, well, I don't complain, but we all struggle. We all struggle with belief. We all struggle with trust. We struggle to see how God is going to do something, how He's going to work something out. And so we struggle, we challenge, we all have our thing. So this isn't just to look at Israel and to say, point the finger at them and say how awful they were and look at how little of a faith they had. This is for us to learn. This is for us to gain a lot of knowledge with them on that. So in this chapter, in this section, there's going to be a pattern. And it's really going to be a pattern in all 4 accounts. And that is that there will be a problem. Israel will complain about it, or grumble about it, or murmur about it, or argue about it. Moses will cry out because they just bring Moses to his wits' end. It literally reads that it's just Moses goes to the Lord and says, I'm just at my wits' end. I really don't know what else to do. I really don't know what else to say. But he'll tell the Lord, and the Lord will answer. The Lord will answer. So that's the pattern in all 4 accounts. There's a problem. The people will react to it. Moses will cry out in response to the people, to Lord, and then God answers. So it kind of gives us a way that when things happen in our life, don't respond like Israel did, respond like Moses did. Cry out to God, because you know who He is and what He does. So let's read this, and then we'll get into the meat of the lesson. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord, your healer. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. So to give you a map to kind of put things into perspective, so you got the Red Sea over here. They crossed over, like we talked about last week, most likely in one of the more shallow parts where it begins. So when it says that Moses made them set out, this is kind of their starting place. And what they're going to do over the next month, month and a half, is that they're going to travel to Mount Sinai over here. So you got Midian. When Moses left Egypt the first time, this is where he was, where he met his family, where he met Jethro. So this is a familiar place to Moses. This will be a familiar place throughout Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy right up here. So when Israel sets out, they're going to travel this way, and Marah's around this area right here. So you got the wilderness of Shur. So this whole area is a wilderness. Then they'll be at Elim. Then you've got the second Red Sea encampment, wilderness of Sin. So we'll refer to this map a lot. But just in terms, we get a time frame. How long did it take for Israel to travel from the shores of the Red Sea to Marah? How long did it say? 3 days. Okay, 3 days. And it says they didn't find what? Why is that a big deal?
Be awful thirsty after 3 days.
You'd be awful thirsty. And I know we look at it, and again, it's easy to say, well, they should have believed, they should have trusted. Let's just put it in what they see. There's 500,000 men, not counting women and children. Yes, Egypt has given them provisions. Well, remember when they left, they plundered. How much water will 1 million people go through in 3 days? How much water will 1 million people, counting livestock, go through? So this isn't something to just say, oh, they're kind of just, they're not getting what they're wanting. This is legitimate. This is understandable. I know in English it says that they complained. They grumbled, they murmured, and we take the negative viewpoint, but let's just, being honest in that regard, you have that many people drink that much water, you're in the middle of the desert. Yeah, I can understand why everybody's thirsty. They're going to die. If they don't die, their livestock will die, children will die. So you've got a lot that's pressing in on them when it comes to it. So to give you kind of another picture, the Israel will be up here, and they're going to travel essentially down. So when they come to Mount Sinai, and there's a couple of other places, so this wilderness is going to be, it's going to be a great experiment. Great experiment. We have something in common with them. This whole life is a wilderness journey. It really is. From the moment we respond to the good news and we come out of the water, yeah, everything's, clear conscience, sins are forgiven, they are forgotten. But the rest of this life, it's ups and downs, and it's a wilderness. And you've heard me say this numerous times. There are no exceptions to someone being able to say, I'm going to opt out and I'm going to find a shorter route. Everybody's got to go through it. Jesus had to do it for 40 days and 40 nights, but everybody's got to do it. The wilderness looks different for everybody. But what I want us to do is to insert ourselves into the shoes of Israel and to insert ourselves in the shoes of Moses and have these things pressed upon us, because we're going to be in our own wilderness. Sometimes it will be things we individually have, but life under the sun, to borrow wisdom from the Ecclesiastes writer, it's what it is. And until we get to our promised land, where there is no sorrow and no pain and no death, we're got to contend with the wilderness. The thing before us is this: either we overcome it or it overcomes us. Either we meet the challenge and overcome it, or not. Now, let's see how we can do that. All right, so Israel comes. They actually find water, don't they? What's wrong with the water? It's bitter. It's bitter. So it's almost the equivalent. It's most likely salt water. You probably have some sort of salt water. Whatever it is, it's undrinkable. It's undrinkable. And even if you try to drink it, any of us that have gone to the beach, you get a mouthful of salt water just because you got hit by a wave. What ends up happening? Does it quench it or does it make it worse? All right, it makes it worse. Makes it worse. What you find in verses 22 through 25 is this amazing part of this story, of this chapter. Everybody's singing. The whole thing starts with singing and celebration. It's the song of Moses. Miriam leads the song. You got all sorts of things. And then within 72 hours, the entire mood changes. The entire attitude, the entire atmosphere. Sounds like life, doesn't it? Kind of going well. Things going well. And then, just like that, things turn upside down. So I'm going to have a little bit of leeway with the text. Of course, if I go too far with it, I'll let me know at the end. So obviously, what's the Lord's answer to the bitter water? What does He do? Okay, so He tells Moses, "Here's what you're going to do. Go get a log. Go, most likely a tree trunk, something like that. It's pretty hefty. And do what with it?" Okay. Anybody ever thrown a stick into a pond and made it drinkable? What's the sense? What's the sense behind that? It's
miraculous.
Okay, you got a miraculous point.
You can't lay it in any other thing. You can't blame it or the cause of it on any other thing. It has to have been God because there's nothing else to make that happen.
Okay, so from a human point of view, it doesn't make sense. You want me to take a log, which most likely is probably a dead tree. They're not cutting down trees because there's probably not many trees to begin with, but it's most likely a dead one. Go ahead, Tom.
But why doesn't that make a difference? 3 days earlier, they watched the entire Egyptian army drown in a sea that they walked across in dry ground.
Sure.
And 3 days later, they're grumbling. I would be scared to death to say anything about anything. And now they're grumbling about water, and they see the same thing happen, something that they can't explain, that they know God had to do. And then we find out just a few days later.
Yeah.
It's all of, how do you come to terms with that?
The best way I can come to terms with it is after we read Matthew 6 and Jesus tells us not to worry, and about 4 hours later we're worrying about something. I think that's just part of who we are in the state that we're in. Yes, ma'am.
And also, it's obedience. They did get the tree or the log
Sure.
and put it in the water, kind of like the man dipping 7 times.
Yep.
They had to take an action.
Yeah.
And then they kind of knew what changed the water.
Sure.
God told us to do this, and then right after we did that, and we obeyed Him,
Right.
it changed.
Yeah. When we get there, because there's going to be another pattern that unfolds with this, and it begins with, there's no way that a human being is doing this. It has to be God, but all of these parts are going to be moving in this in this perspective. Go ahead.
It has to be God, but it is through Moses.
Okay. Yes.
That's important.
That is very important because God is going to use, which is amazing in this. He doesn't have to, but He's going to use a mediator. So He's setting a tone. So some practical before we turn into another part of this. I want to take the bitterness aspect. That's okay. And quite simply is this. Why do problems, struggles, experiences, why do they make us bitter? I'm not saying they always do that. But why do they seem to bring that out in us? Or plant that and make it grow? Why is bitterness?
So it can make us better?
So it can make us better. Okay. True. It could, depending on perspective, attitude. All right. What else? We fear. And I think that's part of what's going on. That, yes, there's a lack of trust. I would actually say at this moment, since it's so early, that there's not a lack of trust as much as they got to learn to trust. I think you guys have probably heard it said before. I know I have, and I think I've said it to you. It took Yahweh about 2 weeks to get Israel out of Egypt. And it took him 400 plus years to get Egypt out of Israel. And part of Egypt is fear. This part of it. Not just idolatry, but that's part of it. So I think fear in this moment, at this moment, maybe not in the third account or the fourth account, but this one, despite what they just saw 72 hours before, and we're about to die.
Isn't that the frustration Jesus had with the same people, though?
Yes.
Over the same thing, saying, send us a sign, show us the Father. And he's like, I sent the prophets, we did all these things, and you still don't believe. It wouldn't matter.
Yep.
And I just wonder, me in the same situation, would it be that? Because I haven't seen the Red Sea parted.
Sure.
You know, I haven't seen the log thrown into the water turn sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Not that may matter. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I never have experienced that, though, but I can't understand the lack of fear. You know, it's like, when your kid gets mad at you, you're afraid for a while, and I just can't imagine 3 days later after they've seen the entire Egyptian army,
Sure.
what they saw in the Red Sea, and we need some water.
And I think this goes to Beth's point last week or the week before. It shows just how forgetful we are. The power of fear. Scott just mentioned fear, but it shows how powerful that is. Yes, sir.
Last part of verse 25, he tested them.
Yes. Yep. And when we get there, that's an important part. Because in Deuteronomy, when Moses is reminding the new generation, not this current one in Exodus, but the new one, you need to go back there because the whole wilderness is a test. The whole experience, every event, all of it is that way. Going back to this, problems, struggles. Why is bitterness? Why is bitterness a potential result of them? So we got fear. I would think forgetfulness, not remembering, just quickly forgetting. But what else would you say? Go ahead.
Well, I think you can go back and use the example of Pharaoh hardening of his heart. We can go back and look at sadness, which is a word that would make you angry. And when you're angry, what happens? You don't use good sense sometimes.
Yep.
And so when you're angry, that hardens your heart, and that's why you have problems, struggles. You lose faith.
Yes.
When you harden your heart.
You do. So it ties into Jesus as those rocks that kind of choke it out, those thorns that choke it out. So that's a great point. That it's anger, it's frustration, but it's never expressed, it's never dealt with. It just kind of hunkers down, and it chokes out any potential. If there was some faith, it chokes it out, kills it, perhaps. Yes, ma'am.
I think their expectations were probably smooth sailing.
That's a good point, too. It's not there, but I think that's a safe assumption to make that, hey, we got out of Dodge pretty quickly. Yeah, we had our backs against the wall, but we made it through. We should just be able to breeze right on through. So it's very possible that expectations, unrealized expectations, or it shouldn't have just been this hard. Shouldn't have been this difficult. So that's a really, really good point.
Could there be a possibility that after they saw what happened to the Egyptian army, they felt like they were pretty special people?
Could be.
And now we're facing a situation and we don't feel so special anymore. And
Yep.
so they're feeling sorry for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're on this side of Christ, so we can focus on eternity. I don't know, they couldn't even focus on the physical, much less an eternity,
Sure.
which could get them through life struggles.
Yeah. No, I would think so. That is possible because Moses will warn that numerous times. It isn't because you're brighter, smarter, or any. So don't get a big head. Yeah. Don't get too inflated. What's interesting is that we struggle with this very thing. We struggle with bitterness, but you know what we call it? We ask it. It's why is God doing this to me? That's bitterness. I'm not saying legitimate or not. That I'm kind of just to the side. The way we express it is, why is God do it? Were you raising your hand?
Yeah, it's just interesting, sort of tagging on to what Tom said. It was 3 days ago that they saw that great event, but they're still in his presence.
Yes.
The cloud is still there,
Yes.
right? So
Day and night.
that bitterness, it could very well be them turning bitter against him.
Yes. Very possible. Yes, ma'am.
Right, I think now we become better when we think, okay, I've been doing the best that I can.
Okay.
I've been trying to do what God wants me to do, but still, here I have cancer.
Yeah.
Or this child has died, and that shouldn't happen to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. If you didn't hear what Robin said, that bitterness comes in when we actually, this is the Job thing, I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to do. I am following. I am listening. We make our list, and this is still happening. This is still going on. This is the psalmist that said, why does this happen? Why is it that one psalm tells us that he doesn't allow the righteous to be moved, and in the next psalm, the righteous is moved and shaken and stirred. I think this is where we are. The bitter water, surely, yes, is literally bitter water. But the key word of this whole thing is bitterness. And Scott, you bring out a point, both of you, cloud by day, fire by night. It is evidence. I mean, the whole thing is there. It's just that it overpowers. So what would you say? How could this be avoided? If it can't be avoided, how could we deal with it? Whether it's anger that's kind of taking root and kind of growing, or if it's a lack of faith, or if it's fear that's overwhelmed, or whatever, what is it that could be done?
Pray about it.
All right, prayer.
Well, counting your blessings, looking at the positives in your life.
Okay.
Weighing those against the negatives. I think that's one thing that the Israelites weren't doing.
Okay.
They expected the deliverance to be different.
Okay.
Their expectations weren't met, then they just started looking at all the negatives.
All right.
I think of just being content to follow.
Yeah, content to follow the expectations, but also counting the blessings, prayer. Tom?
Focus on him and not on yourself.
Okay, so look at the pillar of cloud. Look at the pillar of fire. If nothing else, look there, and he hasn't abandoned. He hasn't left. What else? There are two passages. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You have to look forward to what's coming in the future.
Okay. So this is what Dennis said a minute ago, but yes, look what's coming.
Right.
Yeah, look what's coming. You're not far away from it. I mean, it may look like it, it may feel like it, but look what's coming. Look what's coming down the line. Maybe.
Seems like with Jesus and with Moses, the Israelites expected a different deliverance than they got.
They did. And I think that's part of it. Is my bitterness really justifiable? Or have I overlaid on the Almighty an expectation that should have never been there? I think that Pam and Jeff are onto something with this expectation. And then, like you said, the deliverance comes in a way that you never imagined. Take a dead tree, probably a dead tree, dead log, and throw it into the water. Isn't that going to make it worse, not better? Things like that. So the deliverance comes in on how he's, well, not just deliverance, but how he's going to solve the problem. Yeah. Anybody else? There are two passages in the New Testament that deal with this. One is Ephesians 4. After we become the new man, mindset changes, and he starts literally with this whole list. For instance, if you lied, stop telling the lie, start telling the truth. It goes through this whole thing, and at the very end of that chapter, he will say, put away all bitterness. In other words, there is some, Beth, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, there is something I need to recognize on my own. Why have I allowed this to become this way? Because bitterness is what you said. It doesn't just exist, it actually grows from something. Disappointment, discouragement, expectations, lack of trust, whatever it is. Why have I allowed this to grow to this point where it is threatening? Because the New Testament tells me I need to identify it and I need to remove it. But not only do I need to remove it, I actually need to do what Moses did. I need to cry out to the one who can remove it. That he's the answer to this. Go ahead, Bob.
Too late. Too late.
Too late. Just start talking when you do it. But the other one is Hebrews 12. And it comes at the end of the section where the Hebrew writer says God disciplines. And this goes to somebody mentioned it, Brother Bill mentioned this in terms of a test. We can allow these things to get the best of us, or we can take a view. Whether we know it or not, go ahead. I'm learning my lesson.
We feel we've been offended, or whatever, it hurts, offended, whatever.
Okay.
We have two choices. There's bitterness and there's forgiveness. It may seem kind of silly to be thinking about forgiving God, but if we can maybe think in that way,
That's a good point.
it might help to let some of that bitterness melt away.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I think that's part of the bitterness. What is it that has brought this? Is it expectation? Is it somebody harming me? Is it what? And there's an answer for all of it. Whether it's me changing my expectation to forgiveness to whatever it may be. There are plenty. The Hebrew writer will tell us in Hebrews 12, it needs to be uprooted. Any of you worked in a garden where you've uprooted anything? How gentle are you when you uproot something? It hurts. It hurts to uproot bitterness. But it hurts even more to let it grow. Go ahead.
It cannot be avoided. It's going to happen.
Yep.
So deal with it, as they like to say. And here you are.
Yeah. And I think the whole key of this is what Moses does. And so the first step is actually not us. We identify it. But the first step is the one who gives the answer to it. It's God. So prayer, yes, is our way of doing that. But how much have I involved God with the way that I feel? Whether somebody did something, somebody said something, or it's just life. It's just life. It's this wilderness. But am I going to be Israel, or will I be Moses? Will I be the one that just kind of grumbles against, or will I be the one that cries out to? Because when Moses cries out in all four accounts, the Lord provides a solution to what's there.
Well, bitterness will happen.
It will.
And get over it.
No, it will happen because life, the wilderness, it's just there and it's unavoidable.
Well,
And
you're a human.
yeah, and we're living in a broken world, and part of it is there. But I would say the bitterness is actually it's the root cause. This bitterness is just the symptom. Is it anger again, like you mentioned? Is it disappointment? Is it discouragement? What is it? Because that's what needs to be dealt with. That's what needs to be continued. That's hard. Because you got to face an ugly, ugly thing. That's not an easy conversation to have. Anybody else before we turn to the latter half of this? Go ahead, Justin.
Well, I was just going to say, like, God wasn't, it doesn't necessarily say God was mad at them.
No, not at all.
Right? And God doesn't seem to get mad at them until they turn to someone else besides him.
Yep.
Or something else besides him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess that's what we do with our bitterness. I know for me, I'm kind of an expert in bitterness. A lot of times my bitterness, it comes from all those things that you were saying, but sometimes it's because I'd like to be God. And I say, if I was God, this is what I would do
Sure.
to whoever or whatever the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
But then I want it to be God when it's him looking at me.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So Justin laid out some really good points. One, and it's worth noting, not just in this one, but I think at least in 3 out of the 4, the Lord never just points the finger and rains down fire and brimstone and how dare all. He remembers and knows that we're human beings that are prone to this. And they're learning. That means 3 days in, they're learning as much as it is. The other thing is Justin brings out a good point that perhaps we don't admit very readily out loud, but sometimes we would like to be him. We would like to be him, and whatever it is, you're right, changing the person or changing the situation.
Moses was not going to let him forgive it. He built a statue. The statue might have been of a tree or a stump.
Yeah, they did, and the name even reflects it. So it's going to be part of their history. Hey, y'all remember when we did this? You know, all of that. So to fast forward, does God use a tree to take away the bitterness of the human soul that's created by sin? And to David's point, does he do it in a way that everybody expected?
The wooden cross.
He did it on a cross. A wooden cross. And, again, here's the thing. Moses cries out and is given the solution, and no harm to him, maybe a splinter. What's the solution? God dies on a cross. God dies on a tree. He's thrown. This is it. This is how it will be done later on. So very quickly. So what's interesting to me is that God determines that in his own infinite wisdom, hey, this is a great point in time to do something. We're going to make a statute. Some of you got a rule. Some of you got a law. This is law before law. So why is this? We're going to get into that. Why is this, Brother Brill, you mentioned this a second ago. Why is this called a test? He makes the rule, makes the statute, and right after that it says to test them. Why is this a test? 3 days in, we're going to go ahead and call this moment a test. The whole thing. Why is it a test?
To build their faith.
To build their faith. And I think that's part of the question, and what we wrestle with is, can't there be another way to build faith? And sometimes there is, reading the Word, prayer, being with others, but there is no time to build a strong faith than when you have absolutely no other choice.
All else fails. Hebrews 11:6 says without faith it's impossible to please God. And so you're going through this. They haven't heard that part yet. I understand.
Yep.
But we have.
Yep. And I'll say this in terms of building a faith in general. This is the specifics. What is the Red Sea compared to the waters of Marah? Both are water. What are they compared to one another?
Sweet and bitter.
Okay, you got sweet and bitter. What else? There's something else I'm looking for.
Well, the Red Sea ended up being protective of them.
Okay.
They had crossed it.
All right.
Marah would never be protected.
All right.
Make them sick.
All right. So one kind of saved us. One will kill us. All right. There's something else. Just by virtue, which one's bigger? And which one's little? Does it matter to God? And this is the lesson that Israel is supposed to learn. It doesn't matter if it's the Red Sea or if it's this little pond that we call Marah. It doesn't matter. What matters is that God can do anything. That's the lesson. That's the test. That's what Israel's supposed to learn. We think, well, God shows up in the big moment. God shows up in the hospital room. God shows up in the nursing home. God shows up and works all things for good. Absolutely. But does God work when you had a conflict today at work with somebody and left not on so good terms? We say, well, that's big and little. It doesn't matter. If God solved the issue of the Red Sea, this is the lesson. If he solved the issue of the Red Sea, he can solve this. That's the lesson. That's the whole point of all four accounts. That's the lesson. That's the test. God handled this. In my faith, I should know he can handle this.
Well, they're saying then, so why doesn't he now?
And yes. Why doesn't he do it now? Which is a good reminder that God, I think Scott said this several weeks ago in a book you read, if I remember. God is not a bellhop. He's not the guy waiting for you when you pull your car up to the hotel, and he's instantly going to grab your bags and fix everything just like that. I think that's what, if I remember right. We want the water now. We want the food now. We want the safety now. We want the promised land now. And we're not different. He's supposed to solve it now. Before I say amen, he should answer it now. Before I even utter the prayer, now. God is not a microwave.
What, we call this a test, and God said he did it for a test. Why do you think he provided what the reward would be if they did it? I didn't quite understand.
Why he still gave the answer?
No, why he said he wouldn't allow any of the diseases that he caused in Egypt. I mean, why did he use that, as his promise if they kept his statutes?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't quite, there was no timetable involved in that. There was no, if you obey me today or tomorrow or for a week or for the rest of your life. I mean, there was no.
This is just my opinion on it.
Yeah.
I think it's not at this moment. It's when you get to Exodus 19 and you finally agree to the terms of the covenant, then this is what will be there. I think he's giving them just kind of a pop quiz. This is what's coming, but I'm not going to hold you obligated to it. But we'll see Moses, especially in Deuteronomy, echo those same things. The pestilence will come, the locusts will come, to the point that if you get so bad, I'll actually vomit you out of the land. And he did that 3 times. So you see a pattern unfold. And it's imperative that we see this. Salvation, law, obedience. And I'm going to put it in this way because I asked this question a couple of weeks ago, so I'm kind of setting things up. When did God institute Passover? Before or after the Red Sea? Okay. Did he institute Passover before or after they left Egypt? So why not give the law while they're in Egypt too? Why not just go ahead and give it?
It wouldn't make any sense to, for one thing.
Okay, wouldn't make any sense. They weren't ready for it. All right, what else?
God takes the first step. He saves them first and then says, I'm the Lord that brought you out of Egypt. Here's the 10 commandments.
Yeah, so he's setting, so Tom, when you're answering in terms of these diseases and all, he's setting them up and showing, so it's the way we would word it, it's not there, it's grace. Right? This is Paul that would say, by faith and grace you're saved. Again, we'll bring in the obedience aspect in just a moment, but I'm going to save you, then I'm going to give you the way to live. Then you're going to obey. And it's exactly where we are. You're not ready to hear how to live while you're still in Egypt. You're not ready to live like a Christian while you're still in sin and unbaptized. You're not ready to live like that. We kind of put the cart before the horse, which Jesus teach, baptize, teach. It's the same thing. And this is that salvation, but he also clues them in on their survival. So Beth, I'm doubling back to you. What good would have done Israel? What good would have done Moses to say, that's fantastic. I'm glad you told me to do the tree and throw it in there. But he never does it. What happens? What happens? Does the water turn sweet? Oh, that's great. I'm glad you told me. That's wonderful. But if he doesn't do it, and this is the concept. Israel's survival is going to be twofold. One, this is how she's going to survive the wilderness. One, God. God. If she survives, it's going to be because of him. It's the same thing. If you get out of Egypt, it's because of him. What makes you think the wilderness will be different? If you're to survive the wilderness, it's first and foremost him, not me or you. Second, it's going to be faith, but in this perspective, it's going to be trust. And guess what that trust is in? There's something specific. His word. Right? His word. So it's obviously him, but the way that God is going to communicate it to him is do this. Right? Here's my word. Do this. And Israel now has the choice. And it's the same thing going all the way back to every person we have seen thus far in the biblical account. Will they or won't they? When they do, guess what happens? It works. You get bitter water to sweet water. You get bread from heaven every morning. And when they don't, guess what happens? They lose battles and wars. And ultimately, they wander for 40 years. And it's all of it. It's not one piece of it. It's all of it. How do you and I survive the wilderness that is life? God. Trust. Specifically in His Word. And then go. So very quickly, when God gives out the whole thing, Israel's responsibility, diligently listen to what? The voice of the Lord your God. Do what is right. Give ear to His commandments. Keep all the statutes. And finally, 40 years from this moment, Moses will tell the new generation, man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Fast forward hundreds of years after that moment, the word that came down from heaven will say in his own wilderness, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. If you and I are struggling in the wilderness, it isn't because we're ill-equipped. Who are we listening to? Who are we turning to? Where are we crying out to? And what am I trusting? You can answer those questions. You can identify what's going on in the wilderness. I'll leave you with this thought. But if there's bitterness, it's going to be hard to diligently listen and keep. So see to it that the bitterness is uprooted. Let it go. Class is yours.